I'm sure you've heard the old adage, you are what you eat. There's some truth to that, but today I want to change that just a little bit as we study a biblical, fundamental principle of life. I hope you'll stay tuned.
There's a message true and glad for the sinful and the sad. Ring it out, ring it out, ring it out, ring it out. It will give them courage new, it will help them to be true. Ring it out, ring it out, ring it out, ring it out.
Ring out,
merrily ring,
the word,
speeding away,
Lord, man,
message divine,
and see.
send it today.
Still far from Jesus, many live in sin.
Lost and those in doubt, darkness and doubt.
I want to welcome you to the Truth in Love program. I know we always have loyal viewers that are with us every week, and we want you to know how grateful we are that you watch the program as often as you do. I mentioned a minute ago the old adage, you are what you eat. And that is true. And by living by that principle, it should help people to watch what they eat so that they'll eat foods that are a little more healthy and stay away from a lot of the junk food. But building on that adage, or changing it just a little bit, will draw our attention to a very biblical principle, one of the fundamental principles that can change the way we live. We're in the middle of our series of lessons on Back to the Basics, and this principle has to do with the way that we think. When we turn our attention to the spiritual side of man instead of the physical, we can change that old adage to say, you are what you think. And we'll see very shortly how that principle is supported by the Word of God. We're simply going to walk ourselves through what the Bible teaches about our hearts. And of course the biblical heart references the mind, the place where we think, the seat of our affections and emotions and thoughts. And we'll see that the Bible addresses the fact that the way we think determines who we are, determines the way that we live. And so as we do that today, as we consider that, let's first of all notice that the Bible teaches that the heart is the source of our actions. Proverbs chapter 4, verse 23 says, "Keep your heart with all diligence, for out of it spring the issues of life." You see, from the heart of man, from the inner man, from the thoughts of men, come the issues of life. Now that's a very broad thing to simply refer to the issues of life. And that word means, the word issues, means the place from which something originates. The place from which something goes forth. So what the writer of Proverbs is saying there is that as your life goes forth, as your life proceeds, as your life travels ahead, its direction is determined by your heart. And so we need to keep our hearts, that's the admonition, guard our hearts, because our hearts will determine the direction of the proceeding of our lives. As our lives issue forth, our hearts determine the direction. I want you to consider how Jesus put it in Matthew chapter 15, verse number 18. Matthew 15, verse 18. Jesus said, "But those things which proceed out of the mouth come from the heart, and they defile a man. For out of the heart proceed evil thoughts, murders, adulteries, fornications, thefts, false witness, blasphemies." Jesus reminds His readers that the actions that we do, our voluntary actions, proceed from our hearts, from our thoughts, from our minds. He talks about murder, adultery, fornication, theft, blasphemy, and things like that. He said those things proceed from the heart. That's where they begin. That's where they originate. So you can see then, if we guard our hearts, then we guard our actions in the process. In Matthew 7, verses 16 through 20, Jesus made the point that corrupt fruit is produced by corrupt trees. And so if you're producing in your life corrupt fruit, like Jesus mentioned in Matthew 15, adultery and fornication and blasphemy and murder and theft and things like that, if that's what your life is, if your life is a life of continual sin, if you're living in sin, it's because you've got a corrupt heart. Because the tree is corrupt, and that's what's producing the corrupt fruit. Peter is a good example of showing the connection that exists between one's heart and one's actions. And the specific event that I'm thinking of is when Peter tried to contradict what Jesus said in Matthew 16 about how he, Jesus, was going to be taken and killed to die for the sins of the world. And Peter objected to that and tried to stand in the way of that happening. He didn't want to see that happen. And Jesus responded to him in Matthew 16, verses 21 to 23, by saying, "Get behind me, Satan, for you are not mindful," notice that, "you're not mindful of the things of God, but the things of men." Do you see the connection between the way Peter was thinking and what he did? When he expressed himself and performed that physical action of trying to stand in the way of what Jesus was sent to earth to do, that action came from a bad mind, a place, it came from a mind or a heart that was not where it should be. Jesus said, you're not mindful of the right things. So if we keep our minds, our hearts, where they should be, then the actions are going to follow. It's a very basic and fundamental principle. Notice how Paul put it in Romans chapter 8. Romans chapter 8, verses 5 and 6. For those who live according to the flesh set their minds on the things of the flesh, but those who live according to the Spirit, the things of the Spirit. For to be carnally minded is death, but to be spiritually minded is life and peace. You see, the determining factor on whether or not we are a spiritual person or a carnal person, a worldly person, is the focus and the location of our hearts, our minds. To be spiritually minded is life and peace. To be carnally minded is death. They that are of the flesh, worldly, they are the people who mind the things of the flesh. They that are of the Spirit, those that are spiritual people, are people who mind the things of the Spirit. So again, see the connection between the heart and the action. Psalm 119, verse 59 says, I thought about my ways and turned my feet to your testimonies. The connection. Thinking, I thought about your ways, and action, then turned my feet to your testimonies. In Romans chapter 6, verse 18, Paul wrote to those Christians and talked about how they had made a change in their lives, how they were the servants of sin, but he says, you obeyed from the heart the form of doctrine delivered you, and being then made free from sin, you became the servants of righteousness. So you see there's a connection between the heart and the action. You obeyed, there's the action, from the heart. The heart prompted the obedience. Proverbs 23:7 puts it very succinctly. For as he thinks in his heart, so is he. Don't ever doubt the connection between the heart and the action. As a man thinks in his heart, so is